All right, let's get to the games of the week presented by BetMGM. We're kicking this off with the Bucs and the Lions. We were going through all the games and what stuck out to us. There aren't that many marquee games this weekend. We're going to talk about one more, but the way the Bucs played last week, the way the Lions came into the season with the expectations that they have, the fact that this is a rematch of a divisional round game from last year, Derek, the Lions are 7.5-point favorites coming into this. At first glance, my initial response to that is that feels like too many based on how this playoff game went and how the Bucs played last week, but there's always a good chance that Vegas knows something that we don't. But this is a pretty good week 2 game considering what we saw the last time these two teams were on the field together.
That's where I want to start. I think this Bucks team was kind of an easy team to just write off, or the NFC South is kind of boring. It's kind of ridiculous. But yeah, this is a team that gave this Lions team a real run for their money last year. And obviously, a couple of pieces have changed on both sides. The Lions are hoping to get more down the field from Jameson Williams. The Bucks are, kind of shuffling some pieces around in the secondary. But like for the most part, both of these teams kind of are who they are. Or are who they were last year. And like you said, this is a Bucks team that really gave them a run for their money. And I kind of think they can do it again.
We knew what to make of the Lions coming into this season. They were bringing back everybody. They brought back their offensive coordinator. They brought back their defensive coordinator. They brought back all the component pieces that made this team a real Super Bowl contender and got them to the NFC Championship game. And then they dropped in some more talent on defense. So for the most part, I felt like I knew what to make of the Lions heading into the year. The Bucs, it was a little bit harder because you had this team that won a shitty NFC South last year. Obviously, they win a playoff game against a collapsing, imploding Eagles team, play well against the Lions in the divisional round. But it's like, okay, what is this really? How much of what we saw from Baker Mayfield last year from an efficiency standpoint, how much of that is going to continue? We have a new offensive coordinator, a new offensive system. What is that going to do for this team? Is that going to be a positive? Is it going to be a neutral? And I will say, after watching this team in week 1, I am far more intrigued by what the Bucs may look like over the course of the season. And I'm far more intrigued about what it means for the NFC South race than I was before I saw that Liam Cohen offense get things going against Washington.
What about it gets your blood flowing? Because I think we both came out of last year thinking Canales did a good job, right? And so for us to feel at least as good as they were last year, or even better about where they might be, like what's kind of moving it for you?
I just felt like the passing game looked so dynamic. I mean, so many of the things that they were trotting out. I put a clip of the plays onto Twitter earlier today, but there are so many examples in that game where guys are running open down the field, or we have like 3-man concepts to one side where it's Evans, Godwin, and like Trey Palmer or McMillan. There's just so much juice in the way that they're kind of constructing this, all the stacks and bunches that they were using. The touchdown to, I believe it was McMillan, involved a motion through a stack that we would see from a team like the Rams. And I think that's kind of where I land with this. Even if the Bucs don't have Matthew Stafford, the Bucs do have Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Like there is a lot of receiving talent on this team. So those players filtered through the Rams offensive ideas, which is a lot of what Liam Cohen is going to be bringing to the party here as in his first year as a play caller in the NFL. That's exciting to me. Like that idea in the abstract is very intriguing. And I think the first glimpse that we saw of it leaves me wanting to see a lot more of it.
I think I'm with you. The passing game, it had a little bit more less static, like you said. I think they did a generally good job of getting Baker into some drop back concepts last year and really letting him throw outside the numbers, which is typically where he's done well. But the fact that they were able to get into some motion, some sacks, I think you add a guy like McMillan, who he's a really good route runner. I mean, that was kind of his thing coming out of college, just a really good route runner, knows where to be, knows how to get in and out. So I thought he was a good addition. And then to me, the run game even looked a little bit better. It wasn't that productive, but they were actually trying some interesting stuff. They had a play where they put Bucky Irving like in the slot and jet motioned him across, and then they had GT counter action the other way and still gave it to Bucky. It was like, okay, they're trying cooler stuff than they wanted to do last year. So even if maybe it takes another month or two for the run game to get there, if we already think the passing game is good, and then maybe they have more to tap into in the running game, like this could be a good offense.
Yeah, we talked about Dave Canales last year kind of salvaging Baker Mayfield, and I think that the confidence that he played with last year and obviously getting that contract, there was an objectively good performance from that offensive staff. Dave Canales got a head coaching job because of what he did with Baker Mayfield last year. But I don't think we accounted for how real a possibility it was that Dave Canales in 1 year as an offensive play caller, could they actually be upgrading in going to this sort of Ram-centric approach on offense? It's 1 week. It's against Washington's defense. All those caveats apply for this, but I do think that possibility is on the table, and what that could mean for this team and their chances in the division. I don't think I thought about or talked about that enough coming into the year.
Yeah, and I think the way I would frame that too is Canales had to go in and fix the quarterback and the offense. Cohen just is coming into an offense that played well last year. The quarterback played well and is more confident. He kind of just has to see what he can add to it. And so I think it is a much
And has
easier
better
position.
players.
Yeah, and better players, exactly. So it's an easier position for him to be in, but he also did a pretty good job week 1. So you got to give him his props.
So two units that I think were there was a little bit of an unknown coming into the year. With the Bucs, we weren't sure what the construction of it would be. We weren't sure what the offense would even look like. With the Lions defense, with the team they're playing against on Sunday, we didn't know what this group would be with the talent that they added in the secondary, including Carlton Davis from those Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So what were your initial impressions as someone who was very excited about this Aaron Glenn defense with the likes of Terry Arnold and Carlton Davis coming into the year? What did you think of them in week 1 against the Rams?
It was very different watching it live and then watching back the film. Watching it live, I was like, dude, Cup is just getting him all the time. Stafford is making all these crazy throws. He's doing it under pressure. And then I watched the film back and I was like, I don't know, man. They actually played fairly well in a lot of instances. And I think a big reason that game even ended up being close at the end was they had this play to Tyler Johnson where he's just running a shallow from right to left, right? Carlton Davis is running with him in trail. He's running with him in man coverage. Brian Branch is nailing down from the safety position in front of the shallow route, right? Which is what you're supposed to do. Stafford gets a little bit pressure, throws it on Tyler Johnson's back shoulder so he can spin back into the middle of the field. He makes the guy miss and he goes for like 60 yards. Like that one like weird play that probably isn't going to happen all that often is kind of the difference between this game even getting to overtime. I think otherwise, like Brian Branch actually played pretty well outside of like one really bad missed tackle that he had. Carlton Davis was pretty good considering they were making him do a really hard job all game and kind of follow guys. I thought it was tough. And then Terry and Arnold, man, outside of Cooper Kupp, like really getting him one time pretty bad on an outbreaker, he kind of pitched a shutout. Like he was playing really well. So I actually was a lot more encouraged by this Lions defense.
Your initial opinion, do you think that they are now equipped to play the way that they want to play on that side of the ball with the personnel they now have? I know it's very early, but your initial impressions, how confident do you feel about that?
I would say like 7 out of 10. Like I'm pretty good about where the
That's
secondary
pretty
is.
good, yeah.
Yeah, like I feel pretty good about where the secondary is. I think to me it's just going to come down to like how much further along can they get the linebackers in coverage? You know, how much more can they get away with? Which I'm not too optimistic on that. I'll be truthful. And then just the pass rush, like how much more can they get out of that? Obviously, like Levi Onwuzurike had a really good game. Aiden Hutchinson was just feasting on a backup. So if they can get their pass rush to
There were a
like,
lot of backups.
yeah,
That's the problem with figuring out what that Lions pass rush looked like in week 1, because Marcus Davenport was really good too. But when you're down to left tackle number 3, right tackle number 2, all those interior guys being banged up, I think that Tristan Wirfs and the crew is going to be a little bit better test for that Lions front than what they played against last week.
right. So that's why I can't get all the way there. But to me, the biggest question was what was the secondary going to be and could they get what they wanted out of the secondary? To me, they passed the test. Like Carlton Davis was doing a really good job in man coverage. Some of the ways him and Arnold and Branch were like sorting through bunch traffic, I was like, man, these guys just get it. They're coached really well. They know how to get on top of stuff. Like I feel pretty good about the secondary.
I like that you brought that up, because that's one of the things I'm curious to watch in this game, because we're going to see a lot of those bunches and stacks from the Bucs and the ways that they're going to attack man coverage, because it's the same ideas, right? The same sort of stuff you saw from the Rams last week. You're going to see generally the same sort of stuff from the Bucs this week. So it was a good initial test for that Bucs secondary. A couple things I wanted to mention before we move on from this side of the ball. More Amik Robertson than I expected as part of the Lions rotation. He played like 25 snaps, and I knew the plan was going to be for him to play some nickel while they had Branch at safety. I didn't know it would be this much, and I didn't know we'd get this much Branch at safety. I thought it would be more akin to like the Kyle Hamilton usage, where every once in a while he's back there. But so that was a little bit of an interesting wrinkle I didn't necessarily anticipate. And then the one thing about the Bucs offense last week that I was a little bit worried about, and this goes back to like old school McVay offenses, very siloed shotgun and under center. 85% run when they were under center, 91% drop back when they were in the gun. So just a little tendency thing to think about. And I'm sure as they get more stuff on tape and as they think about their own tendencies, we'll see that get a little bit better. But that was the state of things in week one.
I think that's actually worth bringing up. I'll give him a month, before I get too panicked about it. But when you have to go against a smart defensive coordinator in week 2 like Aaron Glenn, it might bite you a little bit.
Let's get to the other side of the ball. This one feels more applicable to what we saw last year because obviously you have Bowles, you have Ben Johnson. The ideas that both of these groups are bringing to the table are probably going to be similar to what we saw in 2023. And Todd Bowles was not shy last year in that divisional game about how he was approaching this. They blitzed the Lions on 52% of Jared Goff's dropbacks. I assume we will see a very similar sort of plan again. As you're thinking about that Johnson-Bowles matchup, where do you start in terms of what you're going to be watching?
It's exactly that. Do you want to know who brought 5 or more pass rushers at the second highest rate in week 1? It was Todd Bowles. Like he just and granted he was playing a rookie quarterback. Like of course you're going to blitz more against a rookie quarterback, but I still expect him to do that a lot in this game. Like you mentioned, they did that a lot in the playoff game. This is just who Bowles wants to be generally. And I think with them a little bit trying to fit some new guys into the lineup in the secondary, I think it could be nice if you just throw a bunch of pressure and be like, all right, we're just going to a little bit bank on being kind of a boomer bust team and pray that we can get enough of the big plays. And so I think if we assume the Lions are going to get a couple of their explosive plays with guys like Jameson Williams, if you can fight back the other way and fight fire with fire and get a couple sacks, force a couple of Jared Goff, misfire, something like that, that is to me the way to win this game.
Anything about the Bucs defense from last week stand out to you that felt new? Whether it was personnel, whether it was any of the ideas. Obviously week one we get a first glimpse at these teams. Anything that felt drastically different or even notably different from what this team has been over the last couple of years in your mind?
First of all, I was surprised to see Christian Izien playing a little bit of outside corner because he was playing safety in the preseason. He played a lot of nickel last year, so I thought that was interesting. He's like their duct tape defensive back, it seems. Just throw him where you need him. Wherever we need to fix something, he can go. He can go solve it. The other thing was I just thought their front was mean, and that's not to say that they hadn't necessarily been that in the past. Obviously, when Vita Vea is playing at the highest level, he's really good. Some of their linebackers can hit. Bringing in KJ Britt, I think he's a guy who was able to hit really well. So this was just a team that was very willing to bring the fire up front. And I think obviously against the Lions, who were the most efficient rushing team in the league last week, you're probably going to need that caliber of play up front.
I was going to say that this is the team that you're going to need to bring that against. Anything from the Lions that stood out to you as a new wrinkle or something that was a little bit surprising in week one? Obviously, the Jameson Williams element of this is something that we've talked about already and a lot of other people have so far. Beyond what he's potentially giving them in this role, is there anything else about this version of the Lions that you thought was a little bit different?
It was mostly just that. The other thing is, and I would say this isn't even necessarily new. It's just that you could see in certain instances they were taking Sam Laporta off the field, whether it was like 4th and 1s or if they just wanted to be in some heavier 12 personnel stuff, they were putting one of their other, I think, fullbacks on the field. So I just thought it was interesting that they were willing to lean into some other personnel packages and not necessarily have their best, obviously their second best pass catcher in general on the field. So again, that's not necessarily new, but I think it is at least worth talking about a little bit.
Ben Johnson's always going to have his little moments in pretty much every single game. We saw those again. I mean, the leak play to Laporta after like this Amon-Ra St. Brown orbit motion, just so much bullshit eye candy going on that play. And even obviously the JMO double move is the one that everybody's going to talk and think about, but he had an inbreaker where he goes with a little quick motion it's actually Khalif Raymond that goes in like quick motion, and it creates just a tiny bit of leverage with Williams against the corner. And if you give him that tiny bit of leverage and you're tasking someone with following him all the way across the field, that's going to be a losing battle. And so I think the downfield shot elements of the Jameson Williams experience is what people are probably going to focus on. But I do think that the horizontal stretch and just the speed that he brings affecting just the structures of coverages that you're playing against, that element is also very interesting to me. We're going to talk about that with the Chiefs here in a second, but that's not something I was thinking enough about, just in some of the downstream benefits a guy like Jameson Williams could have on the rest of the pass catchers within this offense.
And I think it's not even just the pass catchers. It's Jameson Williams is going to be such a threat horizontally, both in the run game and in the passing game. And you want your run game to be very downhill. That's just a nasty combo to have to deal with. I mean, it's kind of what we're trying to see with, what the Chiefs have done with some of their new additions, where they're trying to get this stretch and then be more of a power run game. The Bills have been that a little bit at certain times. So like it feels like the offensive formula, and they have all of the right personnel to do it.
Williams was limited this week, worth mentioning. Other guys not practicing for the Lions: Penei Sewell, Kirby Joseph, Marcus Davenport, all not practicing. And then Antoine Winfield is out with that ankle injury. He's going to miss a decent chunk of time. So against this Lions offense, that feels particularly notable. Let's get to our next one here. Bengals and Chiefs. The Chiefs are -5.5 at this game. We'll talk about some Chiefs excitement in the latter part of this discussion, but I want to start with potential Bengals panic. After going back and rewatching, it can always go one of two ways, where you're thinking, it's not that bad. Like the actual box score and the outcome and the fact that they lost to the Patriots, that looks awful. But when you dig into it, there's not as much to be worried about. Do you feel like that was your takeaway after rewatching this, or are you just as worried as you were on Sunday night?
I'm very worried. And I
Oh
know we
man,
do
that's
this.
not great.
We do this every year with the Bengals in September, and I know they had a fluky game just in terms of some of the turnovers. Obviously, like fumbling at the 1 yard line after Joe Burrow's like best throw of the day, where he puts it in the corner for Mike Gesicki, and it doesn't get counted and stuff. So like that was just a very unfortunate turn of events. So obviously, some things went wrong for them that you probably aren't going to count on going wrong every week, but I thought the offensive line was still a huge issue. I don't have a whole lot of faith that the run game is going to be any different. Joe Burrow just seemed like he was not very willing to hold on to the ball or make throws over the middle of the field, which at certain points, like when he's played his worst ball, those have been the issues, right? And he kind of does this sometimes early in the season. So you hope that maybe he can, grow as the season goes on. And then the other thing to me was we both came into the season saying if this offense is going to take a step, if they're going to be different and they're going to unlock some other things, they've got to get under center a little bit and they've got to change the structure of some of what they're doing and unlock the run game a little bit more. They didn't do any of that this week. And again, maybe it's just the first month stuff again and they're trying to get into stuff, but it was just concerning to me like that was the talk of the offseason and you just didn't get any of that in this game.
The under center shotgun staff, my understanding in terms of how they decide what they're going to do going into an individual game, if there are tells they think they can get by being in the gun and the way that they align the back, they're going to be in the gun a little bit more often. I don't know what those would have been against the Patriots, but that's my sense for how they divvy up how often they want to be in the gun and how much they want to be under center. But one of the reasons we wanted them to be under center a little bit more and lean into what it felt like in that Jake Browning offense last year is they need to find explosives somewhere, and play action helps you seek those out. The only team with a lower explosive play rate in week 1 than the Bengals was the Bears. The Bengals had one play of 20 plus yards. That was it. And then you mentioned this with Burrow and just the way that he was playing in that game. I thought the first half was worse than the second half. We can talk about why, but he's just taking whatever's there initially to him, even if it's a low efficiency play. Sometimes that's fine, right? If your passing game is going to be an extension of your running game, that's fine. But over the course of a game, you can't always live that way. And especially when you're turning down marginal options down the field. There was a play early in the game where I think it was third down. He has Chase on like a deep curl if he hangs on it. But instead, he comes back underneath to one of the tight ends, 2 yards short of the sticks. Guys stop dead because the Patriots are a fantastic tackling team, and we're punting on 4th and 2. And if you look at the numbers, the only teams that threw short of the sticks on a larger percentage of their throws in week 1 were Washington and the Steelers. A rookie quarterback who they are protecting at all costs, and a Steelers team that knew all they had to do was not turn the ball over to win that game. I hate to break it to the Bengals. They're not walking through the door with that type of defense. You're going to need to score if you're going to win games as currently constructed. And this approach on offense and how passive and not aggressive it feels is a little bit concerning to me.
Yeah, they just don't have enough. Like to me, if you break down offense into kind of 4 different quadrants where it's like rushing game efficiency, rushing game explosiveness, and then passing game efficiency and passing game explosiveness, all they have is passing game efficiency. That they only have one of the 4. You've got to check at least 2 boxes, man. Like the fact that you can't get to 2 of those one way or the other is the biggest issue, because then again, you run into this issue where you've got to be completing like 70% of your passes at a relatively efficient rate if you want to play this way. That's a hard way to live, man. Like Tom
So
Brady
hard to
doesn't
live
even
that
want to
way.
live that way.
It's so hard to live that way, and to me, there's the good example is that 4th and 1 to Yoshivas. I think it was
Yep.
sometime in the second half where it's like, "Okay, we didn't get the 4th and 1, we easily could have gotten that." It's a great play, but I think it was Jonathan Jones who comes down
Yeah.
to make that tackle in space. Well, you no. If you're gonna live this way, that's the margin for error. You're putting yourself into those 4th and 1s, those 3rd and 6s where, "Oh, we're tackled 1 yard short of the sticks. That sucks. Now we have to punt." If you're not gonna hunt out explosives or be able to find them, that's what you're dealing with. And one of the counters to that could potentially be, well, the Pats just played them in this really specific way. It's a lot of disguised soft zone. They force them into those sorts of decisions. Well, guess what, man? You're about to see the exact same challenge and the exact same sort of defensive structure and ideas from what the Chiefs are going to trot out. You talk about disguising too high coverages. Like, that's exactly how the Chiefs want to live. So I'm just not sure why we're going to see a different set of outcomes if the approach is going to be the same based on the type of team they're playing against.
Exactly. And I mean, this Chiefs defense, I don't know if they're going to be better overall over the course of the season necessarily, but you've got for sure a better pass rusher than any of the Patriots guys have in Chris Jones, obviously. He's one of the best in the league. George Karlaftis is solid. And then even like, I don't know, man, Spags, even for as interesting and good as some of the calls were from New England, like, I mean, that 4th and 1 even, they end up dropping out their stand-up edge. So like I think the Bengals have like a bunch set. So the Patriots look like they're 3-over-3, and then they drop the edge off, so they end up 4-over-3, and that's how you're able to stop a play like that. So like they had good calls, but if anyone's gonna do the craziest shit you've ever seen and get into some weird cover two, it's gonna be Spags, dude. Like he was doing it 4 years ago before everybody else was doing it on defense. So I think it's just like one, I'm worried about Cincinnati in general, and then this is also just the worst matchup that you could run into for them.
Yeah, and I also think that the tackling on defense that we saw from the Patriots last week, they're a fantastic tackling team. All the plays that they made in space, that also applies to the Chiefs. You think about the play Justin Reed made in space. Chamari Connor made a couple really big tackles in space in that game. Trent McDuffie had his moments. Like, that's what this secondary does. So a lot of the same issues that they had last week, I think, do carry over to this game. You would hope that with a little bit more practice from Jamar Chase, maybe we get T. Higgins back. This looks a little bit better, but I am officially concerned about the state of this Bengals offense if they're going to be forced into playing this way. And the other side of this is, I think a lot of the mediocrity concerns that permeate the way the offense feels also apply to the Bengals defense. They just didn't look like a very good defense against the Patriots offense that we think is going to have a lot of problems finding firepower this year. The run defense was bad. And then even some of the numbers that looked encouraging at first glance, like they were the second highest pressure rate in the NFL last week. But that was Trey Hendrickson winning on like 25% of his rushes and no one else doing anything. So you have Hendrickson winning, no one else winning, and you're giving Jacoby Brissett like 4 or 5 plays where he's getting efficient scrambles because there's no one else that's collapsing the pocket. So I just have a lot of concerns about what this team is going to look like outside of the 3 or 4 star players that we've consistently been able to lean on in the past.
And the Patriots had guys open. Not like everybody's running wide open every single play, but if you didn't have Hendrickson getting in on a couple of these plays and disrupting Brissett, like they could have probably popped a couple more plays in the passing game. And then you mentioned the run game. We said it coming into the season. They could be the worst run defense in football. And granted, there were a couple of really bad run defenses last week, so they're not alone. But they definitely were in that tier where they looked like they could be that bad. And now you're running into a Chiefs team where I think their offensive line and their run game looked solid against a much better Baltimore run defense. And so I think you run into a team like this. It's just where I get concerned is that if the Chiefs are going to be able to run the ball efficiently and they're going to be able to get some yak with some of their short stuff and the Bengals aren't going to tackle well, the Chiefs are just going to be ahead of the sticks the entire game. What game does Patrick Mahomes lose where he's ahead of the sticks the whole game? It's not going to happen. He's going to put up 40. Like it's just that's this game is very concerning for me.
I have concerns with just the build on this defense too, because if you look at the way they've put this thing together, they've got a couple guys that they retained on modest contracts. Your Sam Hubbards, your Jermaine Pratts. There are a lot of those guys on this defense, and they tried to pair that with high-end draft picks, trying to find stars that way, first-round picks. Well, Miles Murphy still hasn't played for them at defensive end, and that's obviously affecting their pass rush, but we haven't even seen him be a productive player. And the other guys that used to be like solid, reliable starters, I have concerns about those guys. Like Jermaine Pratt just has not been that much of a positive for this team, especially against the run lately. Sam Hubbard is not giving them virtually anything as their other edge player in a world where Miles Murphy isn't playing. And so we're just really starting to chip away at this idea of the Bengals as a unit that has solid pieces everywhere, that is deployed in the right ways. And if that's going to be the case, they're going to be fine. I have real concerns about that model and how legitimate that sort of framing around this team actually is.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we've talked about before, that just roster deterioration. A couple of these guys that were solid in previous iterations of the roster are still there. Obviously, guys like Jermaine Pratt, Sam Hubbard. But, 2 or 3 roster iterations ago, you had DJ Reed, you had Jesse Bates. I think the corner room was better. Like, it's just they were able to fill in at seventh or eighth best player on the defense. And now they're bumped up to like third or fourth or fifth. And if they're not playing at that same level and they're not getting as much help, you just end up in this spot where if your only clear star player is Trey Hendrickson, like that's cool. But like we've seen a look around the league at some of the other teams that only have one star player. Dexter Lawrence is the best defensive tackle in football, maybe. And the Giants are a terrible defense. Like you can't just
And
have
also,
one
the
guy
Giants
like
are
this.
going to be in the race to have the number one pick. We
Yes.
talk about the Bengals, or people talk about the Bengals like the Super Bowl contenders. If you watch this defense and the way that they feel, it is so far removed from the really good teams in the league. And I think that is worrying. If you flip this to the other side and what's going on with the Chiefs offense, I didn't watch the all 22 in like the 48 hours after the game. I was flying back after our event on Thursday. So I hadn't really opened that up in the way that other people had. I was watching it last night, and it took 2 plays for me to fully understand what sort of effect Xavier Worthy was going to have on this offense. And it's not the touchdowns, it's not the end around. It is the why they brought him in here in the first place. And we talked about this in our AFC West preview. The amount of space that he's already creating for everyone else, you saw it immediately. Like the horizontal stretch, and when they're sending him on like these big crossers where he's able to bleed out like half of the coverage, and you have all of this room to work underneath. It's there. Like that was the plan, and it is beautiful to see a plan come together. And it is so cool to watch a staff that knows exactly how to use a guy like this in service of the broader plan they have on offense. And they did it immediately. It took no acclimation period whatsoever.
Yeah, it's not. This is why it's different than the Hill offense, because when Tyreek Hill was there, it was about making Hill work as a vertical player or even as a horizontal stretch player. And when teams started to take that away a little bit, they weren't good enough at the short throwing or running the ball that it was that that conflict of ideas made sense. Now we've gotten Patrick Mahomes to the point where he is as good as prime Drew Brees at throwing some of the underneath stuff. Their run game hopefully looks a little bit better than it did last year. But now you have actual horizontal stretch and vertical stretch, so the offense isn't going to feel constipated, because that was really the biggest issue last year. Is it just felt like they were constipated. And when Patrick Mahomes is as good as he is, eventually things are going to work and you're going to get down the field. But it just felt so hard. Like every single play and every single drive just felt like it was so much work. And in this game, even against, maybe the Ravens aren't going to be the best defense in the league like last year, but I still think they're going to be a good defense. And the fact that it looked so easy for stretches against this team, it's like, man, if you can do that against the Ravens, what's it going to look like, by the time we get to December?
And what's going to look like on Sunday?
Yeah,
That's my
against
worry.
a bad defense, right?
A Bengals defense that looked outmanned against the Patriots in some ways. What is it going to look like against the Chiefs? Again, talk about the scrambles from Jacoby Brissett, some of the issues that they had. I mean, there was a crosser that Jalen Polk caught against DJ Turner. What if that becomes Xavier Worthy or Rashee Rice? And that's what we're dealing with on Sunday. So I'm a little bit worried about how this is going to go. At first glance, when you're looking at this game on the schedule in week 2, this is supposed to be a marquee game, like one of the games of the year. And right now, it just doesn't really feel like that after the way that these teams played in week 1.
Yeah, I think I might have said off camera to you or something like that. If this game were on the schedule in October, I'm sure it would be better, because I'm sure the offense would ramp up a little bit and it would look a little bit nicer. But like right now, for a Bengals team that the defense doesn't look great and September offense is usually not that good, this might get ugly fast.
The way that we're framing this, and we talked about this a little bit earlier in the week, I want to talk about a couple takes that we had, whether it was on our top 10 shows or who was going to win divisions, that at some point on Sunday, based on the way that week 1 was playing out, you sat back and you were like, this doesn't feel quite as good as it did coming out of the hand in August after I actually get to see what these teams look like. Let's start with the take that both of us had when we were picking our division winners and who we thought would go to the playoffs. We both had the Falcons winning the NFC South. After the way that they played on Sunday, I don't necessarily feel super great about that.
It's over. Like, I'm already out. And I realize one game, it's week 1, but just the way that it all happened, I'm totally out. I think you obviously have to start with Kirk Cousins. He just did not look like himself. And what's confusing to me is, like, I would have thought we would have heard more about this during the offseason, about him clearly not looking right, like his Achilles, him
Him
not being
and
able to move.
Rodgers.
Yes.
The fact that both of them are having trouble moving outside of the pocket. To be fair, though, I think this came up in conversation at least once or twice where I was like, how do we feel about the 36-year-old guy on the torn Achilles or the 40-year-old guy coming off the torn Achilles? I think a lot of people, me way too often, were just like, oh, I'm sure it'll be fine. Like they're practicing. They've had a year away. So far, it does not seem fine.
No, it was not fine. The Falcons ran, I think, 96% of their offense from either the gun or the pistol, which is kind of crazy on its own. But then it's also crazy when you consider the quarterback is Kirk Cousins. He is the preeminent get under center, run play action, throw a dig route on time, regardless of who is in the window. Like, that is the type of quarterback you bought for hundreds of millions of dollars. And now that is not the quarterback that you were able to put on the field because he can't move far enough to do under center dropbacks or to turn his back to the defense and snap back up and make a throw. Like, he just functionally cannot make those plays with where he's at athletically. And if you can't do that, you're left with Kirk Cousins being, your entire offense is going to be, the run game is going to be pistol, and then your entire passing game is going to be out of the shotgun, which that alone is already too siloed. And then, like, you didn't pay Kirk Cousins to come in here and be Drew Brees shotgun spread it out type of passer. Like, that's just not what you paid for. So the whole, like, idea of what you wanted in this offseason is just not, you just can't put it on the field right now.
And I think that sort of structure and approach on offense also starts to affect everything else. This is an offensive line that looked as good as it did in pass protection over the last couple of years because of how much play action that they were using. If you're going to make them drop back 35 times a game without any sort of play action, you really learn what Caleb McGarry is
Against TJ
without
Watt.
that sort of support. Yes. And again, they're not going to play against the Steelers front every single week, but I think that they're going to consistently look worse than people anticipated coming into the year if you're going to make them play like this. Like, there are ways to protect your offensive line. The way that the Falcons played on Sunday it's not even just protecting your offensive line. It's not helping them in any way, shape, or form. And that is going to be a problem in pure dropback situations when you're built to run and use play action like this group was over the last couple of years under Arthur Smith. So I'm with you. I am a little bit worried about what that's going to look like, especially because of the way the Saints and Bucs looked on offense. If I told you that of those three teams, two of them just came out guns blazing in week 1 and were the two most efficient offenses in football, and one looked completely hapless, I do not think that you would take the Atlanta Falcons as the completely hapless one.
No, I would not have guessed that. Even with a nice Steelers defense on the other side, I would not have guessed that it was the Falcons.
Well, let's talk about the Steelers defense. I want to get to one of your preseason takes, but I want to hear from one of our listeners first because we got a bunch of great calls this week for airing of grievances, but this one applied more to this segment than one later in the show. So let's just give this a listen.
Hello, I'm Luis David Suarez. I'm calling from Mexico. I'm a long-time listener of the show. I love the podcast. It's my go-to for NFL knowledge, and I congratulate you guys, but I have a little grievance. My grievance is when you did the rating for the AFC, and you did specifically the defenses. Your host, I can't remember his name right now, but he was pretty low on the Steelers front. He was saying, I don't just trust the depth on the Steelers front, and I think that's what's gonna bring them down. And I think we can all agree after seeing the Pittsburgh Steelers performance after week 1 that our front, defensive front, is one of the strongest parts of this team, and it's probably going to carry the team all the way down.
All right, you can cut it off. You can cut it off, Beller. I wanted to play that for a few different reasons. One, I love the fans, international callers. I sincerely appreciate everyone who listens outside of the U.S. It's always great. 2, he didn't remember your name, which is absolutely perfect, and you should feel bad about that because you should feel bad about this take. The fact that you did not pick the Steelers to be one of your top 10 defenses, and then they did what they did on Sunday, you cannot be feeling very good right now. You also took a shot at Montravius Adams in that top 10 defenses show, and he looked fantastic on Sunday.
That is actually probably the part of the take I feel the worst about, was specifically Montravius Adams looking the way that he did. I'm going to defend myself a little bit here. I would like to see them play a quarterback who can, like, move more than one step in the pocket before I'm fully bought
All
in.
fair.
But they looked incredible. They looked really good. I still, again, I want to see the secondary a little bit. I'm still worried about some of the other depth pieces up front. But man, if TJ Watt's going to play that way, and if Cam Hayward is still, by some act of God, going to be one of the top like 8 best interior defensive linemen in football, then that might be enough alone to make them a top 10 defense.
My bet when I picked them, I think they picked them like 6th. My bet was they have one of the best fronts in the league, like one of the best 2 or 3 fronts in the league. And Minka Fitzpatrick is an elite player, and Joey Porter Jr. is like an ascending guy at corner. We'll figure out the rest. And in week 1, that was enough of a formula for them to dismantle the Falcons. I'm with you. It's week 1. Who the hell knows moving forward? But you cannot be feeling good about that after the early returns.
It's funny too, because it's one of those things where I feel bad about leaving them off, but then I looked at like my 6 through 10 and I was like, I don't feel bad about putting any of these teams in. Like I had the Bears, the Texans looked good, the Niners still looked really good. I was like, I feel okay for now.
I had a Vikings one in mind. We're going to save that for airing of grievances because we got a good call about the Vikings. We both have a couple Packers ones. I picked the Packers to be a top 10 defense coming into the season. I understand that looks not very good right now after they did what they did against the Eagles. Maybe this is cope, and I'm willing to admit this. I want to see what they look like not on an ice rink. Is that fair?
And
Like,
also like playing in the country that the sport is played in typically is also, I think, would help.
A non-international game not played on an ice rink, and then I will start to get worried about the Packers defense. It is so hard, and it actually applies to the Eagles. Remember the Eagles front in that game against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl where there's no traction, and when you don't have any traction, it's really hard to rush the passer. Like the guys moving backwards in those situations actually are in a pretty decent spot, and if I thought the Packers front was going to carry them, it would be impossible to do that in that game. So I want to see what the front looks like not playing on an ice rink, and I want to see what Jair Alexander looks like not slipping all over the field when he's trying to keep pace with A.J. Brown. So I'm not quite there with the panic button on the Packers defense. We'll see how quickly I could get there if we continue to see that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'll give them another month, especially to a new defensive coordinator. I'm sure you've got some kinks to work out outside of, figuring out which cleats to put on. So I'll give the defense another month.
You also picked the Packers to go to the Super Bowl. How are you feeling about that right now without Jordan Love?
Not great, because here was part of my calculus, and this was probably too galaxy brain. I obviously picked the Lions to win the division, but my thinking was the Packers could get like the 5th seed. They would get the best wild card seed. They would have a relatively easier, round through the playoffs and get some easier matchups, and they would be able to, this is a young team. They'd be able to ramp up. Okay, that's all good and well, but if they end up, having to struggle through this season a little bit and limp to the playoffs and maybe get the 7th seed, okay, well, now you're playing a 2 seed that is probably the Lions, the Niners, maybe, maybe a really good Eagles team. Like the math and the calculus starts to feel not as good if that's the situation we end up in.
The last one I wanted to ask you about, because their stretch that they're about to hit is not easy. The Jags, you pick them to make the playoffs. They lose a game against Miami they probably should have won based on how they played down to down. Now they play against the Browns, and then I think they have like the Texans and somebody else over their next 3. How are you feeling about the Jags right now and going into what is like a pivotal game for them when you consider the rest of their schedule?
Conflicted, because on a pure panic meter, losing that Dolphins game didn't make me panic that much. I actually came out of it really optimistic about the defense, and then the offense showed some flashes. For as goddamn exasperating as they were in the second half, they at least still showed me something at some point. So I was like, okay, versus not a great team, maybe they can start to put this thing together and give them another month. The problem is, if they lose this Browns game, they get at Texans and at Bills after that. Probably not going to be favored in either of those games. And so there's a good chance you end up at 0-4. And, again, maybe they can upset one of those teams either way. But if you go 0-2 and then you're on the road against 2 probable playoff teams as an underdog, there's a decent chance you end up at 0-4, and it's cooked. So I'm a little bit scared.
Why I think the Browns are an interesting matchup to kind of gauge where this team is. Last year, their game against the Browns felt like the moment where I was like, oh, this is over. Like, the defense is just a complete mess. Remember how many wide open throws Joe Flacco had in that game on play action where the linebackers, their heads are spinning the entire time out? The Jags defense, for the most part, looked pretty impressive against the Dolphins last week. So I just want to see how stable the ship has gotten on that side of the ball specifically, but even some of the stuff that we saw on offense. Like the way that Deshaun Watson played, the way the Browns looked last week, you have to win this game. You have to show that you are a more put together operation than what the Deshaun Watson led Browns look like right now. And if you can't, then I have some concerns about what this is going to be over the course of the year.
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely have to. I mean, listen, and two, if they win this game in a rock fight, if it's 17-13 and you just get out of it, that might be enough at this stage in the proceedings for this team.
Win's a win,
It
especially
wins a
after
win.
last week when a loss was a loss, even if there were some moral victories baked in, a win is going to be a win. All right, we're bringing back a segment now that we actually did for the last couple of years that I really like doing on this Thursday quote unquote preview show. And it's called Under the Hood, where we look at a unit that we're just, playing better than we expected or was a little bit surprising, just trying to figure out, okay, why does this group feel this way? And when we dig into it a little bit further, what did we find out? And I wanted to start with the Eagles offense. This was a group that had a ton of intrigue around it coming into the season after hiring Kellen Moore. They imploded last season on that side of the ball. It just felt like the structure that they had, where it was no motion, no answers against pressure, they felt ill-equipped to deal with the way that modern defenses were playing against them. And the first game last week against Green Bay, even if we can throw out some of the results, again, just because the field conditions and week one, everything else, the ideas that we saw from the Eagles offense last week, I was really encouraged by. So when you got your first glimpse at this group and what they were doing under Kellen Moore, what first jumped out to you?
I mean, the first thing is they just got guys moving around the formation a lot, both in the run game and in the passing game. And I think that was kind of the thing that stood out to me. Just some of the ways that they were able to open up space on the perimeter, and especially vertically. I mean, those are we've said it 100 times when we've talked about Jalen Hurts. His best throws are down the field, whether it's wheel routes, go routes, slot fades, even some of the outbreakers they throw. Like I think the first throw of the game, he tried to throw an outbreaker that was kind of covered, but that's just what he does. Those are the throws that he really likes, and it seemed like offensively they did a really good job of actually opening up those throws and not trying to get to them in as static ways as I think they did last year.
Motion for motion's sake is not useful, but purposeful motion is really important. If you look at the best offenses in the league, they are filled with purposeful motion for the most part. The Colts this year may be the exception. Like the Colts didn't use any motion in week one, and I think they have a chance to be a pretty good offense, but they can also do a bunch of crazy things with the players that they have. The Eagles last year just felt like it was so static, like you mentioned, and I wanted to see it just feel more dynamic down in and down out, and it did. I was looking at the numbers on NGS, NFL Next Gen Stats, 26 dropbacks with the shifter motion from the Eagles last Friday. That was the most in a game for Jalen Hurts over the last 3 years. And the results were there on those plays, 26 dropbacks, 15 of 21 for 212 yards, 15.58 total EPA, which is 2 touchdowns worth, the most he's ever had in a game on dropbacks with motion, 0.61 EPA per dropback. For context, that would literally be more than double what an MVP season would look like from a quarterback. So that was a top, I think, 3 mark for him in a single game since he became an Eagle on plays with motion. So not only were they using it more, the effectiveness of it was better than they'd ever had, even when they weren't a team that was using a lot of it before.
And I think that's what you brought Kellen Moore in to be. I mean, last year, I
Yeah.
think they really struggled, and even kind of in different, even like during the Shane Steichen era with Philly, that wasn't really much of their MO was using motion. Like they were more of
No.
this just kind of get into these spread looks, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to RPO, we're going to use the quarterback in the run game. And it was a little bit using math to your advantage by just having the quarterback be part of it or using the RPO to kind of get some numbers and stuff that way. And then just banking on getting explosives with your 2 really, really good receivers. Now they bring in a guy who's more of a pro style guy in Kellen Moore, who obviously has a lot of experience trying to get, shifts and motions and get into these different sets. And so I think the fact that they were able to pretty immediately show some proof of concept, again, playing a defense on an ice rink, but I think the fact that they showed immediate proof of concept is like really encouraging.
And one of the other things that we were interested in watching is what would the answers be against pressure? because that was the other thing that teams could just lean into over and over and over again last year when they were playing against the Eagles, is if we heat them up, they just don't have any answers. And the early returns are very, very good. On dropbacks where Jalen Hurts was blitzed against the Packers on Friday, he was 6 of 7, second best EPA per dropback against the blitz in a single game during the last 3 years for Jalen Hurts as an Eagle. So the motion numbers and the blitz numbers, top 5 performances in a single game over the last 3 seasons. So it wasn't just, again, doing it for doing its sake. And like the actual results were there. And if you look at some of those plays against the blitz, like even that quick out to AJ Brown, he's going to it immediately. The little crosser to Dallas Goedert, he's getting to it immediately. There was just so much more assertiveness and an understanding of like, these are my outlets when they're going to try to keep me up. And whether that was what was built into the offense or just his level of ownership and control. Like if you watch what he was doing at the line of scrimmage and the checks that he was making in the protection world before, that was all Jason Kelce, like truly all Jason Kelce. So Hurts having more say in how all of this works, it really did feel like that affected how he was accessing some of those answers. And that was really, really encouraging after you watched what this team was doing against the blitz over the last couple of years.
It's the ownership and the assertiveness that really stood out, because obviously with Jason Kelce, I mean, he's one of the best we've ever seen do it. And so,
Hall of Fame tight end.
right, or center, like, yeah.
Or it's Hall of Fame,
yeah.
Hall of Fame center.
Other Kelce.
Yes.
I think it's possible that we were in a spot where Kelce was putting them in a lot of good positions and doing a good job of making sure the protection was right. But for some reason, maybe Hurts just wasn't seeing it the way that Kelce was seeing it, and they were just a little bit on the same page. And if Hurts is going to be even 5% unsure of like why we're in this call, then it's maybe a little bit harder to get that throw off when you have a free runner at you. Okay, well, if Hurts is taking the ownership now and he's the one who, like, the reason we are in this call is because I want to be in this call. Okay, well, then it's a little bit easier to go make that throw. And it doesn't even have to be perfect every time. You know, one of those quick outs he threw against pressure, they're getting a free runner off the right side, and he just throws a quick out to the left side, which is like, okay, you're not really replacing the blitz or anything, but if you just trust your guy to go win on one-on-one and you think that you can get this ball out in time, then do it. And if that's, again, it's not the most sophisticated, like, best answer, but if that's an answer and your players are good enough to win, then that's good enough.
An answer is better than what they were dealing
Yes.
with last year. So if they have an answer, that is an improvement. The couple of more things I wanted to hit on, the AJ Brown element of all of this, that was one more small wrinkle that I thought was notable. They were using him as an isolated receiver a bunch in that game. And for the most part, you know, the Eagles were in 2x2 looks over the last couple of years as much as any team in the NFL. They liked those kind of static 2x2 looks. And I looked this up. AJ Brown, he was isolated 8 times as the single receiver against the Packers on Friday. That was the most in a single game since he became an Eagle. So many different elements of this were just turned up more than we'd ever seen with this Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, Devontae Smith Eagles team. And I think it was really encouraging. And the best moment for me was the Saquon Barkley touchdown. Like that, the passing touchdown. That to me was just all of it coming together, where you have Barkley and Shipley on the field together. There's a little bit of an orbit motion with Shipley coming all the way across the formation. That bumps the linebackers over. So you have Isaiah McDuffie going from essentially just inside the numbers to like the hash, so 4 or 5 yards. And by manipulating the defense in that way right before the snap, you're now making it a foot race between Barkley and McDuffie to the pylon on that play. And you've put McDuffie at an inherent disadvantage with the way that you use the motion. And even throwing it to the back is something that we didn't see from the Eagles offense last year. So that play to me encapsulated all of it. You have a new player, a new idea, and something new that you're trying to access within the offense. And when you have those sorts of layers with the amount of talent that this team has, I think it's easy to get very excited about where they can take this.
And what's nice about it, you mentioned all the new running back. You can throw vertically to this guy, some of the new motion and stuff that they were trying, getting 2 backs on the field. All of that feels new and more, pro style-esque in certain ways. And then it all goes back so that we can do something that the Eagles have done really well the entire time Jalen Hurts has been there, which is just throw the ball vertically, especially outside the numbers. And like that was probably his best throw of the night, man. Like the way he put it.
It was beautiful.
Like McDuffie obviously gets outrun, considering where he was at the start of the play. Like he
made a good play on it.
Like he gets close enough on it that it's like, okay, you force the quarterback to be perfect. Well, it turns out the quarterback was perfect and you still give up a touchdown.
And that's the interesting part of this, is that we don't necessarily need to see a different version of Jalen Hurts. We don't need to see him attacking the ball, attacking over the middle of the field. We don't need to see that many elements to his game that we haven't seen before. We just need the ecosystem around him to be able to allow him to do the things he does well better. That's it. Just give him more options outside of the numbers. Give him more options down the field. As long as you're not torpedoing it with the issues that you're having against pressure and some of the other defined weaknesses that we've seen over the last couple of years, this offense does a lot of things well. They've consistently done a lot of things well. It just hasn't mattered because the weaknesses have ultimately betrayed them.
I think that's the biggest difference that I'm going to have like a mind shift on what this offense is going to be, is that I thought coming into this season, what I wanted to see was a different Jalen Hurts, maybe managing the pocket better, throwing over the middle of the field a little better, some better pure progression type of passing stuff. But the reality is, if they're just going to have these players and they're just going to do a better job of mitigating some of his worst traits and then unlocking him vertically again, well, he just doesn't have to be good at all that other stuff. Like, they will get top 10 quarterback play production regardless of that. So props to them if they're able to consistently do that this season.
And in that same kind of vein, they've run the ball really well. Like
Yeah.
that, just by the way that they're built, the offensive line, the spread looks that they could get into, the space created in the running game. And now you drop Saquon Barkley into that. And again, looks pretty fucking good at first glance, because this is a guy going from the worst run game infrastructure in the league with the Giants over the last couple of years to the best. And maybe we should have it should have been that simple in the offseason and thinking about what this could look like. But now that we actually got to see it, it's like, okay, but that was correct. Like, the bet that he would look so much better with us than he looked with the Giants last year right now looks correct.
Right. In the same way that we had some of the preseason uh-ohs where we were immediately like, oh, I don't want any part of this anymore. We're immediately with the Eagles run game and Saquon Barkley. It's like, oh, never. Okay, that's exactly as good as it was supposed to be.
Yep. The idea of that and what it was supposed to be, we've already seen it. The element of the run game I want to talk about before we move on, though, that I do think is a little bit concerning, and just something that if they wanted to, I feel like they could punt and still be fine. The quarterback run game for the Eagles has now turned into a negative. It used to be a defined positive for them, but over the last couple years, on design runs that are not the tush push and not QB sneaks, they have been inefficient plays. On Friday, it was 5 carries for 3 yards on those design quarterback runs. And if you go back to last year, Jalen Hurts' EPA per carry on defined quarterback runs last season that were not sneaks, the EPA per carry or per play on those runs was about equivalent to the average Chuba Hubbard run with the Panthers. They were not good plays. And I think what that says and what that means is you can't just run normal zone read anymore. Like, that can't be the basis of your quarterback run game. Teams have just gotten too good at defending it. If you look at the best quarterback runs of last week and what teams are doing, Kyler had one against the Bills where they're running pin pull to the left and they're arcing the back to the right, so he has somebody leading up for him. The Lamar keeper on the left side that he had on that first touchdown drive, where they're slicing Isaiah Likely back across the formation. A lot of the stuff we're seeing the Colts do. You can't just run simple zone read anymore. Like, it has to be built in where you're adding an extra body to the design, because that's the only way you're going to hurt modern defenses when the quarterback is running the ball. It used to just be if the quarterback ran it, it was probably going to be efficient. And we have moved beyond that in the NFL. And I think the Eagles are a really good example.
Yeah, we just live in a different world defensively and offensively. 8 years ago or whatever, when the zone read was a huge thing, you could probably get away with most of your quarterback runs being zone based because most of the league was zone based anyway. Like, everyone was just running inside zone at a gun, or if you were under center, you were running a lot of outside zone or weak zone or something like that. So that was just the world that we were living in. It was good against what defenses were doing. Now we live in a world where you have to be able to get some real vertical movement, or you have to be able to pull guys to the perimeter. And so that's why you see the Cardinals doing some of the stuff they're doing. The Bills quarterback run game is often designed this way. The Ravens, when they're at their best, it's when they're pulling guys and stuff like that. So, like, you kind of, because in general, NFL football and NFL run game is moving more to this gap stuff and being able to pull and move and get vertical displacement. Well, the quarterback run game also has to fit that. Like, it's not like it gets to be this separate thing. It has to fall in line. So I think that's a really good point on that.
All right, it's time for the first fourth screen email of the year. For those of you guys who are unfamiliar, every week I solicit arguments for which game belongs on my fourth TV. And what this has turned into over the last couple of years is who can make the saddest, most pathetic argument for one of these games? Like, what is the saddest reason that you can put one of these games on a television? And there was one game that I thought would win this week, and I appreciate you guys really coming through for me. This one is from Brett Herskowitz, and it's titled Giants Washington Hindenburg Game was the subject of the email. He said, "Hey, Robert and Derek, let's be real. We have arguably the worst defense in the league, Washington, going against the living embodiment of a dumpster fire, Daniel Jones, the movable object up against the stoppable force. We're watching a single human being successfully suck the life force out of not only an entire coaching staff, but an entire fan base in real time. Sure, you can watch any number of better NFL players across the 1 p.m. games, but who needs that when you have a chance to see Jones drive poor Brian Dable to the brink of madness? I've already relegated the Giants to my laptop so I can enjoy Red Zone on the TV. After last week, I truly think Jones is so lost as a quarterback that we may be in store for record-setting levels of ineptitude, in spite of what appears to be a pretty league-average supporting cast after week 1. The O-line was the best it's looked in years, low bar I know, and the wide receiving core has Malik Neighbors. You get the chance to see if Dan Quinn's defense is truly that horrendous, or if Daniel Jones is cementing his legacy as one of the worst top 10 quarterback picks in decades. What a treat. Thanks, Brett. Great start. I thought that game would ultimately win it. We're off to a very good start.
It seemed like the obvious one, but sometimes, all you need is just a winning argument for the obvious one. It's just somebody who can really put it over the finish line, and I think we got that here.
When we dig through the schedule, we see things in a slightly different way than probably the average NFL fan does, in the sense that some stuff is going to interest us that might not be as interesting to the casual fan who's just clicking on Red Zone or his multi-view on Sunday. So every week we're going to pick a game or two where I want you to make me care about this game, one that may not seem great at first glance. Let's start with the Seahawks and the Patriots. You have a Seahawks team that I think the football internet is far more excited about than the average NFL fan would be. And you have a Patriots team that was picked to finish with the lowest over-under win total in the NFL this year. So I would like you to make me care as a casual NFL fan about this Seahawks-Patriots game.
All right, listen, I know a lot of people who watch football, they want to see offense, they want to see points, they want, their fantasy teams to do well. Listen, it's a defensive league right now. It's a defensive year. 2024 is the year of defense. And these are the two defenses that kind of embody where we're at. These two and probably the Chiefs embody where we're at. Mike McDonald's defense, obviously what he did last year with the Ravens, just some of, getting into too high, some of the pressures that they were sending. They just did an incredible job. And then over, Gerard Mayo, pretty much doing a lot of what Belichick had done with a lot of his man coverage, getting into a lot more cover 2, which Belichick had wanted to do late last year. And then just both of these teams, they tackle and they're physical and they really run around at a high level, which you really have to be against a lot of these NFL offenses right now. So these two, again, I know everybody wants to see points, but these two are the direction the league is headed in. And I think that's really exciting to watch.
I think there was a mystery about both of these defenses. We weren't sure what Mike McDonald was going to look like without the personnel that he had in Baltimore. We weren't sure what the Patriots defense was going to look like without the best defensive coach of all time. Those were reasonable questions about both of these teams. Week 1, checking a lot of boxes. The Seahawks were number 1 in defensive DVOA after that game against the Broncos. All caveats apply, but still, they looked as good as you would want them to look. And the Patriots defense looked phenomenal, not just from a structural standpoint. You talked about some of the disguises, some of the interesting things that they were doing, but the way that they were playing is what jumped out to me. There was a play I clipped out and I tweeted out earlier this week, and it was a blitz. It was a big blitz. And Kyle Duggar's coming from depth, and he's acting as the penetrator in this stunt. And he actually doesn't clip the guard because he's moving too fast and has his head down. He was trying to use himself as an actual battering ram while adding on to the blitz, and he misses the guard because of it. As part of that play, Keion White is just caving in the right side of the offensive line. He looked phenomenal in that game. So you got Keion White, Christian Gonzalez looked great in coverage against Jamar Chase. Jonathan Jones was flying around the entire game. I have a very good sense of what this Patriots defense is going to look like. And I could say a lot of the same shit and about 5 different guys from the Seahawks and what they looked like last week.
Dude, so the way some of the Patriots guys were flying around, and we'll get to the Seahawks guys too. They were doing the same thing. I mean, Marcus Jones made a handful of really nice plays. There was one where they're running I think a drag or just a short in back across the field. It's like 1 yard away from the sticks. He makes the tackle, and it's like, oh, like that. You need guys to click and close and hit like that to have a really good defense. Obviously, Jonathan Jones making the tackle on the 4th and 1. Keon White was all over the place. Jelani Tavai made an insane amount of plays. He had the like a 4th and 2 that he was able to get his hands on. I think,
Henchman.
yes, just a henchman. And like there was another play. So the fact that Tavai can make this play where he like pops off the line of scrimmage, he's like basically being a spy, gets his hand on that pass, and then he has a different play at a different point in the game where they're running like a pulling play at him, and he submarines the guard, kills him, and makes the tackle. And it's like, why does this guy, like, the fact that he can do both for you is crazy. And then the other thing, like, I think to me, the play that like totally personifies this defense, there was a play they had in this game where they get into a cover 2 look. The Bengals are in 2x2, 2 tight ends attached to the left side, 2 wide receivers out to the right side. They push Jelani Tavai, who is a big linebacker, out into space with the 2 wide receivers. They have Kyle Duggar come down and play the mic, and then they play Tampa 2 with Duggar as the mic. The fact that they're comfortable letting Duggar be the one in the box and then put Tavai out in space with everybody, and they still cover it well, it's like, all right, they can just get away with anything, I guess.
We talked about this a lot this offseason, but good defenses just feel a certain way. The way that they play, the energy that they play with, the fact that it feels like there are 12 guys on the field. And Seattle felt like that in week 1, even with lesser personnel than what Mike McDonald was working with in Baltimore. And I know they played the Broncos. There's a chance it doesn't look as good moving forward. But the way that Boye Mafe played in that game and just the ways they were using him, he was dropping into coverage. He was a terror coming off the edge. They've got a lot of pieces up front. Like, they've just got dudes to push you around on the interior. Leonard Williams, Byron Murphy, even Draymond Jones is a part of this equation. Like, they've got a lot of guys there, but it's the way they played in the secondary where I was like, holy shit. Tariq Woolen looked really good. Obviously, it was a down year for him last year, but he's somebody they were really excited about. That feels justified. Rayshawn Jenkins, who came over from Jacksonville last offseason, he was just flying around.
Mean person.
Like, flying around. And the guy that I just keep coming back to, I cannot wait to watch Devin Witherspoon consistently play football this season, because he's somebody that had made splash plays last year, whether it was blitzing off the edge, whatever. What's so impressive to me about him is that he's just a savant in his understanding of the game. Like, the way that he's passing off routes and the way that he understands route distribution and how he needs to kind of split the difference between 2 routes in order to take both away when he's playing in the flat. This is a guy who plays with his hair on fire, has immense physical skills, and has as pronounced a football IQ of like any DB that I can remember watching in recent years. And that combination of stuff, I don't think people are quite ready for how special of a player he is going to develop into if he stays healthy.
I mean, those are the 3 boxes to check, right? Have all the physical ability, play like an insane person so that everybody around you feels like they have to match that level and play like an insane person. And then just have some of the football IQ that he doesn't, just some of the ability that for him to click and close on stuff, or the way that he can recover because he just understands like where all the moving pieces are. I mean, he's just watching him play is so special. And then he's also one of those guys, he kind of embodies the modern NFL again, because we talked about a couple of times, you kind of have to have one of these guys who can hit and do a lot of stuff from your nickel position.
Yeah.
And he is like the perfect embodiment of that. He's like the pinnacle of what we've gotten from guys like Mike Hilton and stuff over the past few years. He's like a supercharged mega version of that type of player.
The bigger picture discussion here that I think is worth hitting on. I was thinking about this last night as I was rewatching the Patriots defense. I was trying to watch the Bengals offense and study the Bengals offense for that game of the week discussion we were having. And I kept getting distracted by what the Patriots were doing on defense. I can't remember a week when I was going back and watching film where that happened more often, where I'm trying to watch the offense and all the crazy shit and creativity on the defensive side of the ball keeps distracting me. And I feel like we've arrived in that moment in the NFL where there's as many interesting ideas happening on the defensive side of the ball as there are on the offensive side of the ball. And 6-7 years ago, when McVay comes in 2017, Shanahan gets the job in the Niners in 2017, and the offenses are just so much further ahead, that would be inconceivable. That defenses would be as much or more interesting than what those offenses were doing. But when you have this Patriots team, when you have the Spags Chiefs, when you have what the Seahawks are going to do with McDonald, I really do feel like we've arrived at that moment. And it's kind of a weird place to be when you consider the last decade of NFL football.
I mean, that's basically been the way that it's been for the entire time that I've been covering it. I started in like 2013, 2014, and pretty much shortly after that is where we got this huge, influx of like the Shanahan and McVay and all that stuff. And it felt like they really were dictating how the league was being played, where everyone was just, what's the answer to beat all the cover three stuff that everybody is running because everyone thinks that they can be the Seahawks. We very clearly moved away from this world now where nobody wants to be what the Seahawks were, 10, 15 years ago. Like nobody wants to be that team anymore. They now want to be more of this, all right, we're going to find very interesting ways to pressure. We're going to get some of these hybrid body types on the edge. Like a lot more teams are willing to put traditional off-ball linebackers and put them on the edge and sometimes use them as pass rushers, sometimes use them as droppers, interesting stuff like that. We just talked about sometimes the bodies that teams are willing to use at the nickel have changed. Another thing that I kind of noticed this week, it felt like for so long when I was doing football stuff, when a team was going to send a pressure, it was going to be 3 deep, 3 under. It was going to be a cover 3 look where just one of your underneath defenders is blitzing instead of covering. Now, what I think we saw a lot of this week is where teams are willing to do a lot more 2 high pressures, where you're either running something that looks a little bit more like quarters with only 2 underneath defenders or something that looks a little bit more like a soft cover 2, something like that. I just think even if it feels like a minor change, and even if we're only getting 5% more of those plays, if we just keep twisting and turning all these dials 5% at a time, it just looks like a different league altogether. And I think that that's what's so fascinating.
The reason that offenses were so dynamic and so hard to deal with, when those guys kind of took over, was that any single look could result in like 5 or 6 outcomes, right? Like it was the illusion of complexity, right? Where it was actually pretty simple, but you had to account for so many different things. That's what defenses feel like now, where any single pre-snap look could eject into whatever coverage, whatever pressure you want it to look like. And the Ravens were doing a ton of that last year, but it just feels like more and more teams are settling into that sort of identity, and it is very cool to watch. The number that I wanted to throw out, last season, there were 2 teams that played 2 high coverages while after lining up with one single high safety more than 20% of the time. Those 2 teams were the Vikings and the Bills. That's it. Last week, there were 8. There were 8 teams that lined up in single high and played some sort of 2 high coverage that they were disguising. And that does feel like the direction the league is going. And I think that this game specifically with the Seahawks and the Patriots, going back to why we wanted to talk about this in the first place, that is why this game is worth watching more than anything else.
And it's funny too, because that's the exact opposite of where we were at with the Seahawks and all the cover 3 stuff. They would all start in 2 high, and it would be like, all right, which side are they rotating to? That was it. And now it's the opposite, where you're starting in 1 high, and it's like, are they going to be in 2 high? I don't know. And that's kind of the math that you have to do now.
All right, let's get to our first edition here of the airing of grievances. Beller, fire it up.
I got a lot of problems with you people. Now you're going to hear about it.
For those of you guys who are paying attention to my Twitter feed this week, I mentioned that we were doing this. The idea behind this was pretty simple. I understand some of the complaints and some of the frustrations from listeners who feel like there's a little bit of an echo chamber that goes on with the football internet. A lot of people have the same opinions. A lot of people come to the same conclusions, and that can be a little bit frustrating. So I wanted to give you guys a forum to disagree with some of those opinions. So each week on this show, we're going to have a segment where you're going to be able to air your grievances with something we said on the recap show, something we said a couple weeks ago, just something that has annoyed or frustrated you that you feel like is just a little bit too agreeable in how we talk about this stuff. So, Beller, let's get to our first one here.
Hey, Robert. Love the show. This is Mason from San Diego. Just wanted to call, try to get a little more respect put on the Vikings team roster building philosophy and the way they've gone about it. There was a lot of skepticism in your division preview around what the Vikings have done. But I think if you take the context of what was going on in terms of, Kwesi gets hired and there's an owner mandate that the team has to remain competitive. And they could have taken the easy way out. I'm sure Kwesi would have wanted to, tore the whole thing down, like Ryan Poles did. I think Ryan Poles got off pretty easy. He got to do the whole Madden thing, destroy the roster, suck, get the first overall pick. Obviously, he did a great job flipping it. But anyone who's played Madden knows that playbook. What Kwesi had to do was actually build a competitive team while also trying to rebuild, because he knew that they had to move on from all the aging guys. And so what did they do? They win 13 games with all the aging guys. They move on from all of them to clear up the cap space, still keeps the long-term vision while meeting the owner mandate to win in the short term. Last year, team had awful fumble luck. If you take away, if you equal out the fumble luck, which obviously is a big if, they're 4-2 by the time that Cousins gets hurt. Whole season becomes a wash at that point. I think just given the degree of difficulty that they had to work with in remodeling this roster, looking at what they just did the Giants, obviously, Giants are terrible. We all know that, but they stomped them out. And the defense looked really good with Flores, and the offense was clicking with Sam Darnold.
He's right, man.
I think that's pretty damn impressive. I think that basically they were in the situation that the Falcons had with Matt Ryan.
I think that Mason makes a lot of very strong points. And here's what I want to say about that conversation we had about the Vikings. One, I walked it back on Twitter the day after because I went back and listened to it, and I was unnecessarily harsh because I don't think that I took enough of the context into account. And I also think that I wanted to make it clear that I wasn't down on it. I just didn't know what to make of where they were coming into the season. And I wanted to find out. And the first entry into that, what we saw against the Giants on Sunday, looks very good. And I think everything that Mason is saying here is correct in the sense that there was a high degree of difficulty because they tried to straddle these two worlds, that competitive rebuild that they were trying to put together. And what I wanted to know after this season, or at least partially through the way this season, how confident and how bullish should we be about what this group will look like in 2025? Like, what does the actual foundation of this thing look like? Can they find some more contributors that were like mid-round draft picks or guys that they've spent cheap on in free agency? Does the offensive ecosystem look like something where when we drop JJ McCarthy into this thing next year, how good do we feel about that? Do we just expect this to be an offense and a system that's going to lift everybody else or lift the quarterback and lift everybody else around him? And I think there's a chance that that's true. I just wanted to have better answers on all of those things by the time we got to the end of this year. That was all I wanted. And I think that right now you have to be feeling pretty good about that if you're a Vikings fan, what they put on tape last week.
You do. And for me, it wasn't really the approach that I had an issue with. I actually would much rather you do the competitive rebuild thing than the completely tear it down, pray to God we can all hold on to our jobs while we get our high draft picks and then spend those guys and we hit on a couple superstars and then we're a really good team. I would much rather do this competitive rebuild type of thing. I think it's more compelling the whole way through. I think it can keep everybody in the building, kind of good spirits, all that stuff. My issue was I looked at the interior on both sides of the ball going into this season in August and said, that's it. Really? That's the plan. And I was kind of proven wrong a little bit. I actually thought,
yes,
the defensive side, I'll wait and see until they play not the Giants to make a better determination on that. But Blake Brandel, their new left guard, he played him a lot better than I thought he was going to play. He played much better than the guy he was replacing, obviously last year in Ezra Cleveland. He was the guy I did not have very much expectations for, and he more than passed the test. So if he can do that, consistently for the next, for the rest of the season, then that will be where I eat my crow, I think, the most.
That's what I want to see. It's just, can we find those contributors in quieter areas? And I think that the interior of both lines was one of those places. And if Brendel turns into a guy who can be somebody that, is a starter for them long-term, that's the type of stuff I wanted because we just hadn't seen that. Jordan Addison was really one of the only draft picks that looked like a quality starter moving forward. I know some people tried to mention Ed Ingram in this conversation. I'm still not there with Ed Ingram. Like, I absolutely am still not there. But the other side of this that I wanted was the offense overall. That oomph with the offense. Could they run the ball when they needed to run the ball? And a lot of it came when Dexter Lawrence was off the field last week. But again, what we saw from Brendel, what we saw from the interior, what it looked like with Aaron Jones, who's a really good back. All right, box checked. Like, that looked good in week one. What can that look like over the course of the season? And then the other side of it was just, how dynamic does the passing game feel? Like, are we going to feel really good after this year being like Kevin O'Connell is just one of those guys? Like, he is one of those guys that's going to lift everything. And it was hard to tell last year because they're cycling in and out with quarterbacks. Justin Jefferson misses time. I love the way that the offense looked. I love how dynamic the passing game felt, how comfortable Sam Darnold looked. All caveats about the Giants involved here. But the first glimpse that we saw of this, it's like, okay, we're on the road to the answers that I wanted to get about this Giants team. We'll see what it looks like over the course of the season.
Yeah, I'm definitely there with O'Connell. And it's funny too, because I think on Sunday it was very easy to get wrapped up in the Sam Darnold of it all. I watched it back and I was like, he was okay. And the fact that it felt so good in the moment to me is a testament to Kevin O'Connell and the job that he was able to do.
We've got a couple others, but we're gonna save those. I mean, we're already running pretty long on this first one, which always happens on the first installment of any of these shows. We're very excited about everything that's going on. The way that we're gonna end these shows every single Friday, just as we're looking forward to the weekend, I want to talk about one thing you want to know by the end of week 2. Something that you're a little bit murky about right now, but by the time this game is over, you want a firmer answer on. I know week 2, that could be a little bit difficult because there's still a lot of stuff that's up in the air, but what is one thing that you want to know by the time that week 2 finishes up on Sunday?
I want to know how real or how fake was the Saints just absolutely putting up like 40, 50 points on the Panthers. And obviously, when you play against the Panthers, there's going to be some degree of fake. But to me, I think there are some parts of this that definitely feel real. And then it's a matter of like which parts of it feel fake. To me, the stuff that feels real. They ran a lot more motion in this game than they did for most of last year. Last year's offense was terribly static. This year, they bring in a guy like Clint Kubiak, who obviously runs that Kubiak, Shanahan-esque type of offense where they're going to try to get under center a little bit, use some play action, use some motion. And Derek Carr looked very comfortable with that type of stuff. So I thought the fact that they were able to do that, I expect that to continue. That's just the way that the offense is built. The skill players, barring injuries, I think they've got a really good group here. Rashid Shaheed is a really, really good vertical threat. Obviously, Chris Olave is good. Some of their red zone weapons and size, like Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, the one that Moreau high pointed in the end zone. Derek Carr did a really good job directing traffic.
I like Foster Moreau, man.
He's good at what he's good at, right? He doesn't do a whole lot for you, but specifically for like sometimes you got to move the chains, or sometimes you just need a guy who can go get the ball up in the air at the back line of the end zone. Yeah, man, he can go do that for you. And then there's the Taysom Hill of it all. Like, whatever you want to say about him, he is a useful player. So they obviously have the weapons. All that stuff to me is very real. What might be fake is the offensive line seemed to play pretty well against the Panthers. Okay, well, now you're playing against Mike Zimmer, all his pressure packages. You've got Micah Parsons. This could look a lot different, I think, on Sunday than it did previously. And then Derek Carr, he was playing with like a lot of swagger and confidence. He was chirping, I think, at JC Horn. Like, this is just not typically the Derek Carr that we get. So I'm curious to see if that is something that continues as well.
I like how certain elements of the offense are potentially getting the best versions of these guys. With the offensive line, if you're going to lean, it's similar to the conversation we had about the Falcons. If you want to hide an offensive line, a lot of play action is a good way to hide an offensive line. It'll be harder to do that against Dallas. But I think as a general plan, it's going to set these guys up better than they would be in a more traditional drop back offense. The other side of this is that more play action. We've talked about this with with better quarterbacks than Derek Carr. But if you have a guy that one of his biggest weaknesses is the lack of ambition as a passer, more play action, I think, is inherently going to feed into some of that aggressiveness. And we saw that with Derek Carr. Like, that's my biggest issue with him. If he's going to try to push the ball down the field, Derek Carr can absolutely be the quarterback in a watchable offense. I enjoyed those Raiders teams with John Gruden. They did a lot of fun stuff. So if you're going to try to spark that sort of ambition from him as a player, I think that there is a chance the Saints offense could be more entertaining than we thought coming into the season.
That's really all it comes down to. I mean, maybe the offensive line does just totally fall apart, but it really is just like getting Derek Carr to be aggressive, to throw down the field. Obviously, when you have a guy like Rashid Shaheed, you should be designing plays to get him open down the field because he's probably one of the best deep threats we have in the league right now. And if Derek Carr is willing to throw him, they're going to be in a great spot. I mean, shoot, I think it was the first or second drive. The throw Carr makes to Shaheed on the post touchdown, where Carr is like under pressure, condensed pocket. There's just not been that many years in Derek Carr's career where he's been willing and able to make that throw. But when he's at his best, you have seen it in flashes, right? And so if they can just get that guy for, even if it's only 12 or 11 games this season, it doesn't have to be all 17, but if you can just get that for more games than not this year, they're in a pretty good spot.
Mine for what I want to know by the end of this weekend is the Bears defense actually good? Like, is the Bears defense actually a good unit? They played against Will Levis in week 1. Will Levis hands them the game. They're playing against a backup right guard when the starting right guard isn't very good for a good chunk of that game. What does the pass rush look like against a more equipped NFL offensive line? And what does the secondary look like against one of the most dangerous passing attacks in the entire NFL? First time we got to see this group, loved what the secondary did, loved what Tremaine Edmonds did. Like, this is a dynamic group of players with a defensive play caller and architect in Matt Eberflus, who I think is pretty good. And so what does that ultimately look like when you are not playing against a Will Levis-led Titans team? That's what I want to know by the end of the weekend.
What do you think is success for this game specifically? Like, is it something like basically what we got from the Jaguars last year versus the Dolphins, where it's like, okay, it's not perfect. A couple of big plays for this team that is incredibly talented can get a couple on you, but you really make them earn everything, and they only put up 20 points. Like that. That's probably the bar, right?
Yeah. I think that's right. It's like if you can make them earn everything, if it feels hard for them throughout the game, that to me is going to be the biggest question. And that one drive that the Bears got gashed a little bit, they were getting gashed on the ground. And we saw what the Texans' run game looked like last week against the Colts.
Yeah, we did.
I that's one area where it's like, okay, are you going to be able to hold up there? But first impressions of what the 2024 Bears defense looks like, I think it's hard not to be excited, but this is going to be a much, much better test.
And, the thing I was actually most impressed by with the Bears defense was not necessarily an individual player or anything they were doing schematically necessarily. It was that after the first couple of drives, they were killing all of the Titans, like, let's take a breather plays, which was like some of their screens, some of their simple, like maybe, quick game passes, just some of their like jet motion stuff that they were doing. I know they got beat on one, but like later in the game, they were doing a better job of stamping down on that. So like the fact that they were able to shut down so many of the plays that should have gotten the Titans back on schedule with the sticks, and then you put Will Levis in 3rd and 8, like that is the way to make this work. Obviously doing that against CJ Stroud, he might just beat you on 3rd and 8 and it's not going to matter, but that is where you want to get an offense.
I just like the energy they play with too. Like just as a group, like the Kyler Gordon's one of those guys. We talk about a good defense feels a certain way, and the Bears don't do as many crazy dynamic things as some of these other units that we've talked about. But if the play style is there and that attitude is there, that's what's most encouraging to me. And so far, I think that the answer to that is yes. Before we get out of here, we got one more bonus airing of grievances I wanted to trot out because I just thought that it was a perfect summation of how a lot of people feel after week 1. But let's let that roll and let's get out of here.
Oh, Robert, do I have some grievances to air? Adam, longtime Packers fan, growing up in Eagles country here in Pennsylvania. And Jesus Christ, what was that Packers game? They literally had like 3 opportunities to put the game away within the first like fucking 15 minutes of the game. Nope. And instead, you have to play come from behind, and you get your franchise quarterback, allegedly.
The pause on the nope is why I needed to play
this. $55 million to go down the field on a last friggin' second drive and have his knee just explode. So, yeah, I have grievances, Matt LaFleur. What are you doing, you pretty boy? Actually call real plays in the end zone, or maybe get receivers who catch and don't put on.
It's the rhythm of it all. That is,
wait.
What in the hell are we even doing? Congrats on the Bears win, by the way.
That's the call. That's it. It's 10 out of 10. 0 notes. What a perfect encapsulation of what it is like to be an NFL fan in week 1 when you came into a season thinking that your team could win the Super Bowl and your quarterback gets hurt and you won in very frustrating fashion. Like that's just a perfect distillation of all of it.
He hits every beat and every note perfectly. Every pause is just absolutely perfectly calculated, knowing when to throw out the pretty boy. Like it's just, couldn't have done it better.
This is what we're looking for. The voicemail line is open. It is going to be open for the entire season. 917-725-1524. I encourage you guys, if you have grievances, if you have something that you just need to share, if you have feelings that you want to express, it's all here. We're here for you. Everyone that called in, sincerely appreciate it. Everyone who listened, sincerely appreciate it. We will be back on Sunday night live on YouTube, youtube.com/The Athletic Football Show if you want to watch our Sunday night recap with us. If not, it's going to be available as a podcast for you in the same way that it always is. Always great to chat with you guys. We'll be back on Sunday. Talk to you soon.